Dickinson. Good evening and welcome again to Ideas at Work and Beyond. Tonight, this evening, ladies and gentlemen, we have wall-to-wall blue blazers. And when you look at blue blazers and you're in Fairfield County, you got to be thinking conservative politics. We have a brain trust in this studio this evening that I think you'll find very informative and very entertaining. And along those lines, I would like to quote this politician, this profound politician that's bringing new and interesting insight into our current economic situation, the situation of our culture. Let me quote these profound words. The budget should be balanced. The treasury should be refilled. Public debt should be reduced. The arrogance of officialdom should be tempered and controlled, and the assistance to foreign lands should be curtailed lest we become bankrupt. People must again learn to work instead of living on public assistance. This is so relevant. This is so cutting edge. This commentary from a politician, and it's from a Marcus Tullius Cicero, circa 106 BC, the Roman statesman. This is over 2,000 years ago. Let me read it one more time. The budget should be balanced. The treasury should be refilled. Public debt should be reduced. The arrogance of officialdom should be tempered and controlled. And the assistance to foreign lands should be curtailed, lest, and in this case they say Rome, become bankrupt. People must again learn to work instead of living off of public assistance. You know, I don't want to be an alarmist. I'll be honest. I'm going to be transparent. I want to be open with you. I showed you pictures of my inner knee last week, so you know I have nothing to hide. My wife, who I love dearly, will sit and watch his show, Glenn Beck. I'm not sure I buy into everything Glenn Beck has to say. If you're to listen to him, you'd think that we're all going to just, collapse 2 weeks from today. But she's sitting there listening to this, and she feels like this country is really in trouble. And, it's interesting when I read this quote from Cicero. Over 2,000 years ago, it would seem as if Rome, who, by the way, after this time, Rome really collapsed sort of around 300. It depends, where you date it specifically. But it's not unusual what we're going through right now. But it seems like this time around, and Dave Straight's with us this evening, he's going to talk more about this, it seems like it's a little bit more dangerous. It's a little bit more tedious, a little bit more tenuous where we're at. We're at a crossroads. We have to make some decisions as a country, and I think the election coming up in November is going to be a long way towards saying which direction we are going to go. Are we going to go the direction of more and ever-expanding government and more powerful government, and the nanny state's just going to take care of us? If we just give them all our tax dollars, everything's going to be okay? Or are we going to pull this back around the other way and say, you know what, wait a minute. Yeah, we're going through some difficult times, but there's been 22 recessions in the last 100 years. Supposedly there's been something around 79 recessions in this country since the 1700s. And it's going to be okay if we stick to our guns and count on the private sector. There's little tidbits I pick up, and I'm not sure how... Yeah, you can get this pretty good. This is an aerial nighttime view of Korea. In the south here, you have South Korea, a bastion of freedom, a democratic society where capitalism and free markets are allowed to reign. In the north, you have controlling government that controls absolutely everything. It's to be perfectly honest with you, it's run by a guy that has a affinity for Elvis Presley and wants to wear his hair like Elvis Presley. So he's a little whacked out. But still, in the north, you have government control and no freedom, no free enterprise. And if you look at the two, vibrant societies, cities lit up at night, and in the north, they can't even feed their people. Yet they have quasi-nuclear weapons. So these are really the decisions that the United States is faced with. Which direction are we going to go? Are we going to follow Cicero's advice, and that is balance our budget and refill our treasury, and what did he say about officialdom, and avoid the arrogance of officialdom? Sometimes when I look at what's going on in Washington, I think we have that in spades. But also, people must learn to work instead of living off the public assistance. So there you have it. The more things change, the more they stay the same. But this evening, I'm very proud to have a good friend of mine, David Straight, joining us this evening, and he's going to tell us how we got into this mess. And we also have Keith Viela, sorry about that name, and he also is representing the Ridgefield Liberty Cooperative, and you're going to tell us a little bit more about that and what we have coming up. But Dave, I want to start with you.
You sure?
I'm positive.
All right.
I know when we started this show, I said, don't worry about it. I'm just going to rant a little bit at the beginning, and you'll feel like you'll never get a word in edgewise. But I promise to stop and not take up all the oxygen. But how did we get in the mess we're in right now?
Well, thanks a lot, Marty. Appreciate you having me on the show. I think your show is terrific, and I think it's making a difference. You know, and getting prepared for the show tonight, one of the things I struggled with the most was where I could put my teleprompters, and didn't know if that would work. And then I thought, well, maybe I could just write something on my hand, you know. But in any case, I have too many notes here, so I just had to write down a few things. You know, Jesse Jackson made a comment a while back, one of his campaign slogans, and his campaign slogan was, we need to take common sense to high places. And when I look at the situation that we face right now, I realize that what we do need is common sense, and that seems to be the thing that's lacking. What it feels like to me right now is we're in a boat and we're headed over the falls. And we've got 3 parties in that boat.
I'll hold this up. You keep
Yeah,
going.
that's okay. And that only has 2 parties in there, and it's maybe giving the Republicans a little too much credit.
Okay, so we got the 2 elephants going that way, and the caption reads, we won't get anywhere unless we get a little cooperation. And he's talking about health care, and I would believe it's Barack Obama basically paddling us over the falls.
Exactly. Well, I would add to that a little bit, and I would say you have one party that's paddling towards the falls as fast as they can. You have another party that had the paddles for 8 years and really didn't get us out of the way, harm's way. And now they're standing complaining about the way we're paddling. And you have a third party there, and that third party is actually the American people, and they're paddling as fast as they can to get upstream. So that's where I see the political situation right now. And when you look at how we got into this mess, you know, it was really everything in excess in American society and global society. And what causes a recession is a surplus in production capacity for goods and services. And when you look at Western banks, we leveraged up to 40 to 1 and 50 to 1. So for every dollar that was put into a bank, they leveraged out $50.
Okay, so just to slow that down, because my brain doesn't work quite as fast. So I got $100 in equity, and that allows me to loan out $5,000.
Or 1,000, right?
1,000, okay.
So at 51, yeah, sure, at 5,000. So what happens is when things are going good, they make a lot of money. The second things start going bad, now for every dollar you lose $40 on the way down. So that's the crushing weight of the excess that we face. Here's actually a terrific picture of Dubai. Okay. And that's my definition of excess. Because what you have is in the middle of the desert, you have one of the most modern cities on the planet that dwarfs pretty much anything that we have in America. And it's just really remarkable. And when you think about surplus production capacity, right now globally, we have the production capacity to produce 80 million cars. And we're on our way to producing 100 million cars. Okay. Global demand is only 50 million cars. So this past week when you saw where GM authorized spending another $30 billion to pump up Opel, that's taxpayer money that's going right down the drain. Opel is not a brand that's going to survive in these markets, and it should just be shut down. We have just way too much capacity. So
if we just take that as an example, in the car business, we have way too much capacity.
Right.
We have the government involved now.
Right.
You have the unions involved, and at some level, it's kind of like make work for the unions. It seems like it's a recipe for disaster.
Exactly. That's exactly right. And so I guess it was to your point on getting the government involved, it was no coincidence that in the month of February, GM sales plummeted by roughly 30% because, well, and the government's clearly involved with GM. Ford is still private, and Ford sales exploded.
And they just posted a profit. Well, it was like a $43 billion profit or something ridiculous
Yeah,
like that?
I don't know if it was quite that high, but it was pretty healthy, and their stock is up around $13. So Ford stock has gone from $1.50 a share to $13 a share, and GM is irrelevant. I mean, they're completely broke and dependent on the government. So going into this recession, what we did was we took money out of assets that appreciated and put that money in assets that depreciated. So if you start from 2001 to 2007, there's this thing called mortgage equity withdrawals, right? Okay. So if you had equity in your home, you could take that out and you could spend it on things.
Right.
So if you strip out the impact...
Allegedly.
What do you mean?
I mean, you see, if you've ever seen the porch on our house, that's what you can do. You can take money out and get a second mortgage, and you can put a nice big porch on your house.
Oh, I'm sure it's a nice one.
It was a nice porch, but I don't know. They were throwing money at you.
Right.
I mean, not like 6-7 years. I mean, I remember I would come to my mailbox. I would go through the envelopes, and it was, you've been approved, $70,000 line of credit. You pre-approved, just fill, and it would come in the form of a check. Here, just fill in the amount of the check. You've been pre-approved for $100,000.
Right.
I mean, I can remember getting the envelopes out, and I would just feel for the plastic card in it. I wouldn't even open it. I'd go, is there another plastic card in there?
Yeah.
I mean, the amount of money that these banks were loaning out, and home equity loans, and second lines, I mean, it was just incredible.
Right. Well, and
according to you, it was obviously unsustainable, and that's part of the problem.
No, that's exactly right. So if you strip out the impact of mortgage equity withdrawals on GDP, between 2001 and 2007, the U.S. economy never grew over 1% a year. So the number that was reported, we were seeing 3.5%, 4%, and everybody was feeling great. Right. Well, it was all the result of taking money out of assets that appreciated and spending on things that depreciated: boats, cars, motorcycles, toys. So, and in going into this recession, our factories were only running at 67 to 68% of capacity. So we had massive surplus capacity going into this recession. So then you got to ask yourself, what was the government's response? The government's response was more debt and stimulus, right? More debt in the form of stimulus. So I thought that was a good depiction of the stimulus program, and a couple more on debt there. Okay. We'll just keep rolling these cartoons. Yep. So when you think about it, the government steps in, and they call it stimulus, and I call it a bank heist. Stimulus is when you have money saved and you take something out of savings. Right. We didn't have anything in savings. We're already broke, and then we're just printing more money. So central bankers over the course of the last 2 years increased the global money supply from $65 trillion to $75 trillion. They created $10 trillion out of thin air just by, in theory, printing it. Yeah. In the U.S., we printed $3 trillion alone. It's a staggering amount of money, and it's not backed up with anything. Since this crisis began, the U.S. government has either borrowed, printed, or guaranteed... This is a good one. Mount Rushmore on the one side and Mount Spendmore on the other side, if you can get that. Go ahead. So the government, the U.S. federal government has printed, borrowed, or guaranteed $23 trillion in the past 18 months. That's a staggering amount of money. Are you there? 80% of the stimulus in 2009 and 2010 hold the line. Went into 5 existing government programs. That's all. Money. Okay, hold on one second, because the caller has a question. Caller, you on the air?
Yes. Good evening. How are you?
Good.
So can I ask a question?
By all means. I liked your question, because I think it's germane to what you're talking about as far as just increasing the money supply. But go ahead.
Increasing the money supply. Well, these trillions of dollars running up. There are a lot of young people out there, Marty, and our friends there, their guests, that don't remember that they weren't around in 1979, 1980, 1981. They don't remember 22% interest rate on car loans, on mortgages. They don't remember. They weren't there. They don't remember.
Paul Volcker, right?
Pardon me?
Paul Volcker. Didn't he jack up the interest rate to kill inflation?
Right. When is the hyperinflation going to hit? When is the higher taxes going to hit? They just can't print up trillions of dollars and shove it off on us. They're going to start to bleed us either in higher interest with hyperinflation and higher taxes. When is that coming?
All right, good question. Thanks a lot. How about that? Has he got a point?
Let me use a lifeline on that.
Okay, let's go to the lifeline.
Well, that's a hotly debated topic, and in the short run, you could actually see more deflation. In other words, the data that's currently coming out has been deflationary. Japan continues to struggle with deflation, and to the extent that we're competing in the U.S. against an unlimited supply of cheap labor in Asia. I mean, the average annual income in China right now is $5,000 a year. The highest province in China is $11,000 a year.
No, wait, hold on a second. Because China, we hear, oh, they're turning into this economic powerhouse. They're this monolithic economy that it's going to just swamp America. But you're saying the highest paid person there is making $11,000 a year?
The highest, in terms of the provinces, the highest average annual income of any province in China is $11,000 a year.
Okay.
So, but let me just continue a little bit on the stimulus for just a second. This is fascinating. I don't think anybody is aware of this. But, well, somebody is, but 80% of the stimulus in 2009 and 2010 went into 5 existing government programs: Social Security, Medicaid, unemployment comp, student aid, and grants to state and local governments that just went into the general budget.
You know what the common denominator through all those are?
What's that?
Unionized labor, more often than not.
Yep.
You got unionized health care, you got unemployment insurance comp, that's right, student aid, grants to state and local governments. The vast majority of state and local governments go to unionized labor.
Right.
I mean, it's just overwhelming.
Right.
But okay, go ahead.
What percent of the stimulus money in 2009 and 2010 went into the so-called shovel-ready projects? Do you remember how many times we heard shovel-ready?
Yeah.
What percent do you think?
I read your notes, so I know. But go ahead. I want. Yeah, Keith.
2%.
That's what I read.
2%.
Yeah, you had it in your straight talk. You're talking about that. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, is it any wonder that we haven't seen any new jobs? Now, what's fascinating to me is in the first half of this year, you're about to see all these unemployment numbers look great, or turn around and start looking much better. You know why? Because they're going to hire over 1 million people to take the census.
Yeah, okay.
That's going to go into the unemployment numbers, and we're going to think, oh, everything's grand. You know what? It's all artificial again.
Okay, but just to the caller's point, here's layman's thinking.
Yeah.
You talked about the money supply.
Right.
And when they're doing these stimulus programs, like you say, it's not like we're taking this money out of Fort Knox and cashing in some gold and giving it out to build some bridges. We're just basically taking a computer and adding a few dots to it, a few decimal points, and then just printing the money.
Right.
So we're increasing the amount of dollars that there are circulating. Doesn't that at some point have an inflationary effect on the currency?
Hyperinflation is a very unusual event. What makes it's very, very difficult to predict when something like that happens. I mean, it happens once every 100 years or so, and it really happens when there's a loss of confidence.
Yeah, I'm not saying.
I think it will happen. The timing is very, very, very tough to call. In other words, right now, the only way the Federal Reserve can conceptualize, and the Federal Reserve has said it, the only way they can conceptualize getting out of this problem is to continue to print and print and print. Their goal is to create inflation. Once they create it, it may be too much for them to control. In fact, this is you get me started on this stuff. Think about this. For the past 3 months, the administration has badgered the banks. They beat them up for
the fat cats of the banks,
not lending enough, irresponsible lending, greed, everything in between. Then they come out and they say, well, we need to get you to lend more money, right?
Right.
And then the Federal Reserve comes out with their latest program to take some of the liquidity out of the market, and now they're paying the banks not to lend out money. I mean, it's circular. It just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, I think there's something. I mean, we go back to basics, and we go back to Adam Smith and The Wealth of Nations in 1776. He talked about the hidden hand of the market, and the markets are incredibly efficient. You know, if the market was allowed to just dictate how much car manufacturing capacity there was, if you're going to sell 50 million cars, I don't know, worldwide, is that what you were saying? Then the free market is going to build factories such that they will produce 50 million cars a year. They're not going to arbitrarily produce more just to make work projects for unions. It's not going to happen. The more the government, I don't care if it's health care or car companies or the banks, the more government comes in with their, grandiose ideas of how things really should be, not how they are, right, the more it screws up in the end. And the tougher the correction is in the end.
No, that's exactly right.
Did you ever read Ayn Rand?
Yes.
Some of her stuff?
Yes.
What was it like? Thus stole Zarathustra. How do you say that? You could do better.
No.
Okay, or Atlas Shrugged or something like that. You read these books, and they're, in a sense, they're novels, but it's essentially the outcome of kind of a bleeding heart, do-good, liberal government that says, we need to loan money to people, even if they can't pay it back, because it's just not fair unless you do that. So, you got to do that, and it's just fair if you do that. Well, look what happens. When you loan money to folks that can't pay it back, you think you're doing them a favor. You're not doing them a favor, because that mortgage you made for them, they're going to foreclose on their house, and then where are you? And oh, by the way, the paper that's generated from that gets funneled all around the planet, and before you know it, Iceland's broke. And that's all the government getting involved in the marketplace.
Right.
With the best of intentions.
Mm-hmm.
And now, it just ticks me off, because I'm sitting at home and I'm hearing these people talk about, a member, a constituent of ours, had dentures, couldn't afford dentures, so her sister dies, and before the poor girl, goes on to her reward, she gets her dentures, and she's wearing her sister's dentures. Ergo, we need to turn over 1/6. This happened. You saw it on TV, right? I'm not making. You can't make this stuff up.
Couldn't believe it.
Ergo, from that, that heart-wrenching story, you make this leap to we need to turn over 1/6 of the United States economy to this government who's efficiently run nothing, except maybe for McChrystal, what he's doing in Afghanistan. That's another story. But because of this story, this heart-wrenching story, Barack Obama comes into some meeting today with another heart-wrenching story about someone who had trouble with their health insurance company. By the way, I have no love for the health insurance companies. But when you want to tell me that you want the government to come in and start running this stuff and we're all going to be better off in the end, you lose me. I'm sorry. And this is from personal experience we talked about on this show. My wife's from Canada. I have seen up close and personal what socialized medicine looked like. And it's not a pretty picture. And we talked about my brother-in-law's got liver cancer, and it was, he went to the doctors, and it took 3 months for the doctors even to get back to him and say, oh, by the way, you have very aggressive liver cancer. Listen, could you come back in 6 weeks? We might be able to get you in to see a cancer doctor. He comes back, the cancer doctor says, well, we're going to have to run some psychological tests before we start any therapy, chemo or otherwise, on you. And, listen, how's 3 weeks from now? So now he's had 6 months where he has this very aggressive cancer, and they couldn't care less. It's socialized medicine. Just shut up and get in line. Unless, of course, I'm getting wound up here now, but unless, of course, you're the head of a province like the guy in Newfoundland who's got a heart problem, and guess what? He's on a jet so fast down to, the godless free market health care down in Florida to get his heart looked at. So I guess what's good enough for the little people aren't quite good enough for him. And, oh, by the way, Congress isn't signing up for this health care package they're trying to shove down our throat. They won't hire Jim Himes, you're not going to do this health care thing, and you know it. And you're going to vote for this thing, and I hope you're so unreelected in November you can't believe it. But all these congressmen and all these bleeding heart guys that are going for this health care system, they're not signing up for it. Are you kidding me? Get in line for this crap? No way. They're not doing it. But anyways, and
to that point regarding senators and congressmen, what concerned me is 2 days ago I made a point of calling every congressman in Connecticut and every senator in Connecticut.
How'd that work out?
I got through on the second ring, and that really troubled me. That means that citizens have given up calling their congressmen and senators, and they're just resolved to take whatever's coming their way. And they will pay for it for the rest of their life.
I'm telling you, they're grinding it down. Obama in 1 year gave 414 speeches on health care alone. Because if you just understood how great it was, you'd be all for it. Yet in New Jersey, in Virginia, and now in Massachusetts with Ted Kennedy's old seat, time and time again, the guy, Scott Brown, ran. And in every stump speech, he said, I'm going to be the 41st senator to vote against this socialized medicine health care program they're trying to shove down our throat. Every single stop, he made that same speech. He won. We're not talking about winning a Senate seat in Wyoming or Utah. This is Galdang, Massachusetts, and he won. What more do they need to know? What more do they need to know?
Well, you know, one of the biggest problems, and I don't want to get too much off track here, but one of the biggest problems I see in Washington right now is only 8% of the people in the current administration have spent time in the private sector. Yeah. And the average for all previous presidents is 54%. Yeah. You have people that have never run a business. They have no... You know, I've got a neighbor who, a terrific guy, and maybe was a little bit more left-leaning before, has started his own business. Guess what? He's more right than I am now. Run a business, you figure it out quick.
You know what you had to say, that a conservative is a liberal who's been mugged, and a liberal is a conservative who's been arrested. It kind of changes your point of view. But these guys, they've never met a payroll. They don't know what it means to market a product or a service in the open marketplace. When you had this guy, Attorney General Blumenthal, God bless him, according to Al Robinson, who's, by the way, doing yeoman's duty here tonight, on his wife's birthday, by the way, which it's a long story, but Al Robinson's a champ in my book for a lot of reasons. But Al Robinson said that Blumenthal, it's a shoo-in. He's going to be the next senator. The ratings, all the polls and everything else. But all I know is that Blumenthal, in one of his last stops, said that lawsuits actually create jobs. Lawsuits create jobs.
Nice.
They create jobs for trial lawyers.
Right.
He actually said that.
Right.
I mean, that's you know, it obviously he hasn't met a payroll or tried to run a business. Hold on one second. I know I'm taking
You go.
Keith, I just want to get you into the mix here. Because Dave's talking economies. He's talking, you know, dollars, cents, money, cash flow, inflation, and everything. Your organization, the Ridgefield Liberty Cooperative, sort of comes at all this from more of a political point of view. Correct me if I'm wrong, but we were talking before. It's kind of an outreach of sort of libertarian, would you say? Ron Paul-like? What's your political approach to what we're talking about?
I personally am a libertarian. Not all the members of the group are libertarians. It goes from conservative to libertarian. We're not so much political. We all met during the Ron Paul presidential nomination campaign in 2007.
By the one, he won the CPAC straw poll, by the way.
Yes.
I don't know if you saw that. It was in the news.
Very glad to see that. Don't know what that means for 2012. Although in 2012 I'm hoping for Gary Johnson from New Mexico, who we're going to be bringing to Ridgefield in April to run for president as well. Another libertarian. But with Ridgefield Liberty Cooperative, while we all met through the Ron Paul campaign, the idea was really more to not be overtly political, but really more a forum to talk issues and to bring all sides to the table. You know, as a libertarian, I find a lot that I agree with conservatives, particularly on limited government, individual liberty. But, you know, there's also a lot of commonalities with the left. You know, less of an interventionist foreign policy, for instance.
Legalized drugs, is that one of them?
Yeah, I think that would be a good step to take, at least along the lines of marijuana. I think that's something that Gary Johnson is well known for. You know, strong constitutionalist. You know, the drug war is something where I think a lot of Republicans talk about being for the Constitution, but I don't really see a constitutional basis for the federal war on drugs. And it's just yet one more example of how we're kind of overreaching, stepping on civil liberties, expanding government needlessly. Again, particularly the federal government, which is not what our Constitution did not be set up to do. So for this, yeah, you know, again, we're trying to get issues out there. We've had speakers come to Ridgefield, author Kevin Gutzman, who wrote author of Who Killed the Constitution, co-author.
Oh, yeah.
We also had Gene Epstein, who's the economics editor of Barron's, came to the Playhouse to talk on the Federal Reserve. Again, I think the Federal Reserve being really a sort of fundamental problem that's creating a lot of this, you know, cheap money, cheap credit, that, you know, the government's overspending with this cheap money, the people are overspending with this cheap money, everybody's throwing a party, everybody's, you know, spending like they're drunk, and at the end of the day, it's really the, you know, Federal Reserve who spiked the punch.
Yeah. I was watching, it was on 60 Minutes, and they had the head of the Treasury, and they brought everyone in, and they said, well, this is how we create money. You know, they always try to go to the printing press, you know, so dollars being printed. He said, no, it's over here on the computer terminal. And he goes, here, boom, boom, and he just added, you know, $1 trillion to the flow of cash. I mean, it's just remarkable. And I know that you had this, you talk about spending money like a drunken sailor. I think we have a political cartoon that addresses that, you know, precisely. I think we just had that right out here. But we'll find it. But yeah, I think now, I was struck by your email request to come out. This is on a. When do you usually meet? What night of the week? And what's the restaurant that you meet at?
Well, we recently did an event at Saji in Ridgefield.
On Katuna Street.
Yeah.
Right across from the firehouse there. And,
Correct. And that wasn't a regular event. That was something to get together to talk to people about ideas. Dave was there as well, and a bunch of other people. Talk about what we've done, talk about what people would like to see in the future, and to talk about Gary Johnson coming on April 2nd.
I like the preamble to your email. You said that some of our founding fathers found it necessary to have a pint of beer in a tavern and talk about political things. And in that grand tradition, you're having...
Well, that was for that event at Sagi, to get together, have a few drinks, and talk about issues. And again, that's part of what our founding fathers' vision too was, a citizen government. And, part of what we've talked about here tonight. You have these politicians. They go up to Washington, and unfortunately, a lot of the time it changes them, and not for the better. And they get up there, and they start spending our money in all kinds of ways. When you're spending somebody else's money, you spend a little more freely. And when you want to buy votes, when you're buying with somebody else's money, you can buy a lot of votes with it. So
that's true.
It's again another fundamental issue that we've got to address if we're ever going to take care of all these problems we have in our country.
Yeah, it's funny. Like the guy said, if you take from Peter to pay Paul, you can usually count on Paul come election time. And it's almost like the tax increases are rolling in. One after another. Now they're hidden. But in this health care bill that they're proposing right now, among other things, it vastly expands the role of the IRS. Because the IRS now is going to be responsible for, Dave, we got to get Al, we got to get the close-ups on Fatal Attraction health care bill. Some of these cartoons, we'll have to get them up. But this health care bill that they're talking about, among other things, in this 2,700-page monstrosity, vastly increasing taxes. It's like, well, guess what? You really need to buy into this health care. And, oh, by the way, we're going to have the IRS come after you if you don't buy into this health care. And so they're vastly expanding the role of the IRS. If you think your money gets taken out of your paycheck now, wait till this health care bill passes. If it does, it'll be a problem. So.
And it's another great example of where we're ignoring our Constitution. I mean, there is no constitutional basis for the federal government to require anyone to buy health insurance. And things like the stimulus too. That they talk about government creating jobs. But government doesn't have anything to create a job with. Government only has what it takes from somebody else's pocket. So when they might create a job by giving money to the state to keep on a worker. But they're taking money away from somebody else that probably would have been used more productively in the private sector to potentially create more jobs. Yeah,
you were saying that you were spending money like drunken sailors. This is a great political cartoon that has that. All these cartoons, by the way, are thanks to Dave Straight. And you can get on your email list by what?
Well, you can just send me an email at the last name Streit, S-T-R-E-I-T, Dave@yahoo.com.
Okay.
Just send me an email, and I'll add you on for a nightly copy, and you'll get all my cartoons and commentaries.
I love them. I love them. Here's another one, Healthcare Fatal Attraction. For those of you that remember the boiling bunny scene in this movie, Fatal Attraction. They're very good. I love it when yours come up. And this one, this next one, if we can hold on here. This one I like. It's our president once again describing Obamacare, and the guy says that's going to be a hard pill to swallow, and the other guy goes, "Psst, it's a suppository." A little graphic, but I think you get what they're talking about with Obamacare.
Yeah, most of these cartoons are from Michael Ramirez, who is in Investors Business Daily every day, and he is just absolutely incredible.
Well, I think sometimes political cartoons tend to, boil down the essence of what we're talking about.
That's right.
And whether it's from the right or from the left, I think it does a good job. Okay, the grand scenario here. How we got into this problem? What is the cause of the recession, and then give us some hope here. We got time. We got 20 minutes. Get us out of this problem. How are we going to get out of it?
Let me just spend a few minutes on where we are today. Because most people are thinking, oh, the worst is over.
We've turned the corner.
Right. We're over the hill. It's blue skies, green shoots. All is good.
We've brought ourselves back from the precipice.
And yet nobody really seemed to tune in when Greenspan commented 4 weeks ago that the worst is yet to come. That's what he said in testimony. So when you look at it, right now the current administration proposed for 2010 a budget deficit of $1.6 trillion. Now, that in itself would be a tragedy, but it's actually far worse because they're not including all the off-balance sheet items. The wars, $10 billion a month of Freddie and Fannie that's going down the tubes. The actual number is closer to $2.8 trillion out of a $3.6 trillion federal budget. That means that 3 out of every $4 that the government spent last year and this year, they either borrowed or printed. That is inconceivable. I mean, it's clearly unsustainable. So roughly 20% of the U.S. annual GDP, U.S. GDP, is debt. Greece this year is 13%, and we've all heard about Greece for the past, 2 months?
Yeah.
We're 20%.
And they're 13.
Right.
Right.
I don't know where all the excitement is over there. So our reported national debt in America, $14 trillion. Our actual debt, $70 trillion. Because there are legacy costs that we're on the hook for, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, all these legacy costs come back to bite us. So over the next 20 years, our deficit balloons. Now here's what's interesting, and I don't think people are really aware of this. Everybody, I would guess most of your viewers, much like myself, would assume that that we've cleaned up the whole credit problem, that we're really making a difference, tighten credit. What do you think, relative to the peak of the subprime crisis? What do you think current average credit scores are right now for new home buyers?
So what you're asking me is, were credit scores better before this economic downturn, or now that we've theoretically turned the corner and worked everything out, would they be better?
Right.
I would like to think that with increased savings rates and some of this debt unwinding and being paid down, they would be better. But would I be wrong?
Very good. As a matter of fact, they're about the same. So you have, on average, U.S. new mortgages being written in America today are back at subprime levels. The average down payment is 3% again, and we're getting ourselves right. And we've thrown in an $8,000 first-time home buyer credit that can be used against your down payment. And in spite of all that, home sales just dropped 7%. So, are things really getting better? 9 million jobs have been lost. The government currently is underwriting 90% of all mortgages. They are the new mortgage business.
Wow.
They're the only game in town. There's an acronym that's being touted right now regarding the EU, and it's referred to the PIGS, and it stands for Portugal, Italy, Ireland, Greece, and Spain. Now I've offended everybody from those countries.
Okay, Portugal,
Italy, Ireland, Greece, and Spain. They make up a third of the EU.
Okay.
A third of the EU is completely broke. Spain is carrying $580 billion of non-performing debt on their books right now.
Wow.
These are staggering numbers. So, and a sign of things to come, Greece, in an effort to get out of this mess, just increased their sales tax at 20%.
Wow.
I mean, and they're being urged to sell their islands.
Yeah.
Can you imagine us selling our state parks?
Yeah,
I'm sure that would go over great. America right now has the highest corporate tax rate in the world. We're being forced to compete against countries in Asia that have corporate tax rates of 5%. You have 150 million people in India and China willing to take jobs for $5,000 a year. China needs to create 14 million new jobs a year.
There was a friend of mine that was talking about GE. And they said that for decades and decades, GE, which is a pretty well-respected company, had, if they had, let's just pick a number, 100,000 employees, it would be 50,000 were U.S., 50,000 were, from foreign countries. But now, because they're able to hire people from India, and we're not talking about labor, like physical labor jobs. We're talking about engineers, really white collar, computer analysts, engineers, and so forth. That now the breakdown is 70% foreign, only 30% American. So you're right when you say that there are these other countries where people are willing to do the same thing, and it's a global village, and that's where those jobs are going, at
Right.
least according to this guy.
Yeah. So look at China, and they, like I say, they have to create 14 million jobs a year just to keep their unemployment at a constant. That's that's a big task. In the U.S., we have to create 1.8 million. Interestingly enough, most people think that China is, still exploding, and certainly there is growth. They reported growth 10 to 11%, but they now are hitting a point of surplus capacity in most sectors. They actually have a city called Qinggong that has a capacity to have 600,000 people live there. They have roads, schools, buildings, shops, condos, homes. No residents. They have 55 empty skyscrapers in Beijing right now that have been built, completed, no occupants. And it's just the result of the stimulus that they've poured into their economy. So I think this is a real interesting one, fact, if you will. The capital to output at the peak of the Japanese bubble in the 90s, or late 80s, early 90s.
Right.
The ratio of capital to output was 3. In China right now, it's 6.
Okay, what does capital
In other words,
to output, what does that mean?
How much debt, or how much the government would have to spend in
Right.
order to increase GDP by 1%.
Okay.
And it's a ratio. The higher the number, kind of the worse shape you're in.
Okay.
In other words, you would think if you can stimulate a little bit and get a lot of growth, that's a good thing. That would
Right.
make a small number. But the situation in China now is actually more extreme than it was in Japan. In fact, you have property values in Hong Kong right now selling at $700 a square foot. That's a staggering number.
Yeah.
And then that's multiples of Reading and Ridgefield right now.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
I mean, way beyond replacement cost. Clearly a bubble that will burst at some point. Regarding U.S. debt, the U.S. This year is going to try and finance $2.6 trillion worth of debt.
And I thought we're selling all our treasuries to the Chinese.
Right.
But you're telling me that the Chinese aren't really in that great a shape.
Well, they're in great shape. They just don't think our dollar is. So they're running from our dollar. So in 2006, they bought 47% of the new debt that we issued as a country. Last year, they bought 5% total. And then actually in December, they were net sellers of $35 billion.
Who bought the other 95%?
Yeah, well, Japan was a pretty good buyer, and actually U.S. citizens were good buyers.
Okay.
And the banks had an unlimited supply of cheap money.
From the U.S.,
Right.
that's cyclical in some way.
Right, borrowing at a quarter and lending back to the government at 3 or 4, 3.5% on 10-year notes.
It's good business.
It's not bad.
Yeah.
But what's interesting is, for all the talk about turning the corner, I don't know if you saw it, but the percentage of, or the total number of banks that are on the watch list, in other words, they're more or less defunct, increased 27% in the last quarter.
Yeah.
We're now up to 702 banks that have yet to roll over.
Okay, Dave, we spent 45 minutes personally bumming me out. I think many of our viewing audience could be on a suicide watch at this point. I want to spend the last 15 minutes telling me how we're going to turn the corner on this thing, because we've been there before.
Right.
You can remember when Jimmy Carter was president, the malaise that happened there.
I try to forget.
The 20% interest rate, which a caller talked about earlier.
Right.
But Ronald Reagan came in, he cut taxes, he shrunk government except for the Department of Defense, which expanded, and he turned things around. So in the last 15 minutes, economically, I want to tell you what we're going to do to get out of this thing, because I'm sick and tired of this downturn in the economy. I want to turn it around. And then you're going to give us a little bit from the political point of view, what your organization in general, Gary Johnson, if this is the guy, this is your horse in the race, he's going to do. Why don't we start with you? Where do you see things from a political point of view turning things around?
Well, politically, I think the issue is to get government out of the way. Again, to get our fiscal house in order, to address all these issues that we've talked about tonight, the nonstop borrowing. Governor Johnson, when he was governor of New Mexico from 94 to 2002, he eliminated the budget deficit. He did it while holding the longest time without a tax increase in New Mexico's history. He eliminated 1,000 state employees without any firings.
Just through attrition.
Yep, and the part of how he did that is being tough. During his tenure, he vetoed 750 bills, and that was more than the other 49 governors combined. So I think what we need is tough politicians who are ready to lead our states and our country and say enough is enough. We've run up a huge, massive debt. We have unsustainable deficits. We have to address the entitlement spending immediately because that's probably our biggest problem. We also have to rethink our defense budgets.
Have you noticed some of that with the new governor in New Jersey, Chris Christie, and what he's proposing? He's coming out both guns blazing.
It's very impressive, and I think that's exactly the type of leadership we need.
Okay, because it's not exactly the best way to analyze these things, but you hear the radio ads. And the radio ads from the teachers' unions, when you would think that children were being thrown out in snowdrifts and not taught at all, and that we're, condemning them to an uneducated, illiterate future, because he deigns to suggest that we could curtail the ever-expanding growth in some of these budgets.
Yeah. I think the sad part is that if we don't do the things that Christie's doing now in New Jersey across the country, we may reach the point where we are kicking the kids out in the street because we don't have the money to do anything.
Yeah.
Again, defense spending. We've got our military has bases in well over 100 countries. Is that necessary?
Yeah.
Europe's spending themselves into debt with social spending, but in part because they don't need to do the military spending because we're basically their military.
And it's been that way for decades.
Yeah.
During the Cold War, they survived under our nuclear shield that we put over Europe.
Right.
And we carried the load for all that.
And if you look at the Cold War...
Where's the peace dividend?
If you look at the Cold War, the Russians had a massive army. They had maybe the most powerful army ever, especially when you go back before Reagan in the 70s. We talk about the Malays under Carter. Well, we didn't defeat them with missiles or anything else. What we did was we spent until the bottom fell out on them because they couldn't afford it economically anymore anyway.
It was Texas Hold'em, and he put all the chips in with SDI, and they got no chips. They had to walk away from the table. Yeah.
So they ran it up, and you look at the similarities. It was Afghanistan that was sort of part of their nail in the coffin, and like I say, we're all over the place. We're in Afghanistan. We've been there for a number of years. Who knows when that's going to end?
So you see some savings in defense. I mean,
I see savings across the board. You don't take anything off.
Leave with honor in Afghanistan and Iraq. I'm kind of, encouraged to see they're having another election cycle. There's some violence, but it's not as much as before. This might be democracy Baghdad style, which might have some getting used to. But at least they're arguing, and at least there's a vote, and people are working towards that vote, and that's how they're expressing themselves. So we might have established a democracy there. We'll have to see. History will tell. But what I hear you saying, and maybe your candidates, is we need to kind of wind ourselves out of these two entanglements in Afghanistan and Iraq, and then find some savings in the Defense Department, and then just limit the role of government.
Yeah, exactly.
I loved Ronald Reagan when he said, government, if it moves, they want to tax it. If it keeps moving, they want to regulate it. And if it stops moving, think GM, they want to subsidize it. And that's, we need another Ronald Reagan. I'll tell you, the more I look at it, that's what I think we need. But I think America is great at producing these kind of political changes. Producing the fix that needs to happen, and I think we're beginning to see something like that.
Yeah, I think unfortunately for a lot of people, it's got to smack them in the face before they're ready to come forth and actually do something. And I think that's the point we're reaching. I mean, you look at these deficits, you look at this debt. We're in a lot of trouble, and I think it's becoming clearer and clearer to people that it has to be addressed. And like I say, I don't think you take anything off the table. I think it starts with entitlements. I think you look at defense. I think everything's got to be cut. It's not only getting a president in the White House who's willing to do that. It's getting another 50 governors who are all ready to do that, who are ready to say, hey, if you're going to give me unbalanced bills and if you're going to try and balance by just raising taxes that are going to hurt the economy, I'm just going to veto until we get this right. I mean, you look at Connecticut, we're in dire straits.
Yeah.
I think Governor Rell has used some vetoes and all that, but she's gotten us part of the way there, but we still got a long way to go.
Yeah.
And
you know where we're in good shape? On the local level in the town of Ridgefield. From a budgetary point of view, gosh, they have a great Board of Finance in Ridgefield. But from a budgetary point of view, last year we saw our revenues to the town shrink $1.5 million. It's a pretty good hit. And what did we do? Oh, well, we're going to have to raise taxes? No way. Taxes were not raised. We went to the school board. We went to the various unions. We went to Mr. Marconi on down, had a salary freeze. Through attrition, we moved some people out, and it worked out. It worked out. It can be done.
And that's a big part of the reason that I think we need to also devolve power.
Yeah,
so let's take power away from Washington. Let's bring it back to the states like our Constitution intended. And then from the states, let's bring it back to the towns.
Yeah.
You know, the citizens can come to their town hall and talk about issues and spending, but they don't go to Washington very easily. They don't go to Hartford very easily. So we got to bring it back to the local level where citizens can get involved and do what's right in their
Locally,
towns.
we've kept our house in order. Caller, you're on the air.
I just had to call in. It was a great show tonight. Hey, look, two quick things. I know you guys are talking about cuts to defense. While we're talking about cuts to defense, I do recall back, let's say, no less than maybe about 5 years ago, when the Defense Department wanted to reduce the size of the military in crime. And also, I read from the time they didn't want to scrap it to Virginia-class submarines in over in crime. And all the MAGA delegation, Republicans, Democrats, both sides of the aisle, on the local, state, and on the federal level, fought to stop that from happening. So when you talk about making cuts to defense and trying to defend down the size of the government, it's okay to say that on a national level. It's just if it's your own backyard, if it's your own district. Rob Truman's got a bit about shrinking government, but it didn't like he was a congressman to put the pedal over shrinking the size of the defense because he brought it to his district. So when it affects you on a personal level, you're not really doing anything about it, but we're talking about cutting things so it could be in your backyard. And the second thing I want to bring up is I know you talk about local stuff, Marty. You're in Port Pioneer in Ridgeville. I want to get your opinion on the full-time kindergarten that's going to be a big issue as your budget season is coming up around the corner. I think what?
All right, thanks for the call. Sounded remarkably like Al Robinson. I'm not sure, it might have been his brother. But yeah, two things. To his point, and we'll give you the final word on this because you got to get us out of this hole. But we want you to come back too. We want to do a whole hour on this. But it is true, to Barack Obama's credit, he went to some meeting in Baltimore of all the Republicans, and he stood up in front of all these congressional Republicans, and he said, yeah, you guys are all talking about how spending is bad, and it's bad, but he said, but when there's a ribbon cutting in your district, where tax dollars are coming to your district, you're front and center for the photo op, saying, I'm bringing home the bacon back to this district, and so forth. So I think he brings up a good point. We can talk a good game about fiscally conservative, but when they're going to close the sub-base in our district, all of a sudden all bets are off, and this is a worthwhile use of tax dollars to defend against the godless communists or what have you. As far as full-day kindergarten, a lot of these decisions are made by the Board of Ed. They have met. I read in the paper that they've decided that the $700,000 budget item they want to have in their budget. They're coming to the budget process where the Board of Selectmen have a non-binding recommendation on the Board of Ed budget. I think their budget was a 2% increase. The Board of Selectmen are going to have a look at it. Then the Board of Finance will go to a public hearing and hear from people, and then we'll go through the numbers, and we will come up with a number that we will then bring to the public. And in the end, it's raw democracy, at least in Ridgefield. We have a public, a town-wide referendum on every budget, and we will try, like we've been talking about. I don't know what they're doing in Washington. I don't know what they're doing in Hartford, but in Ridgefield, we will bring a balanced budget with limited tax increases and still provide world-class education and services to the citizens. So that's what we're going to do. And we're not going to get a lot of stimulus money, and we're not going to get that much money from Hartford either, unfortunately. But so that's what we'll see. If Superintendent Lowe and the Board of Ed say that full-day kindergarten is the way to go, from an educational point of view, they're paid to make those decisions. We're going to try and crunch the numbers and see where it all shakes out and give the lowest tax increases possible to the citizens. So that's where we're at with that. You got 5 minutes. Bring us back from the edge. Tell us how worldwide we're going to start turning this thing around.
Well, a wise person once said that the first step to getting out of a massive hole, stop digging.
That's good.
And it just seems like the current administration thinks the best way out of a deep hole is straight to China. Dig deep enough, you're going to get out of it. But step one, when you look at our trade imbalance right now, it's about $420 billion a year. $290 billion of that is on energy. The first thing we have to do is, I don't want to say we won't. It's highly unlikely that in the next 10 years we'll achieve energy independence. However, we can do a lot to move us in that direction, whether it's a development of natural gas, whether it's drilling off the coast. More importantly, it's nukes. 75% of electricity generated in France comes from nukes. We need to go with what we know. I'm not going to say all the money we're spending on these green energy initiatives, but a great deal of the money that we're spending on these green energy initiatives are actually going to drive up the costs of energy in America because it's depriving these the conventional energy efforts that we so desperately need yesterday. We need to cut regulations on those, and we need to make nuclear energy possible again. How much time we got?
Got a minute left.
Okay.
To solve the problems of the world.
Well, now I'm going to guarantee I get to come back.
Okay.
Healthcare. I'm horribly discontent with the notion of the healthcare proposal that's being forced down Americans' throats. When you think about it, one of the proposals that came out by one of the Republicans was health savings accounts. And if you think about it, Social Security is basically defunct while 401ks and IRAs are well funded. What does that tell you? That the private sector does a better job managing money than the government does. It's the same thing with health savings accounts. You need to promote and expand the health savings account program. The other thing is tort reform. The current health care proposal penalizes states that propose tort reform. You need to limit liability. A third of a doctor's salary goes to liability coverage. That is driving up costs. Another thing that's driving up costs is unnecessary and ineffective treatment. People getting surgery that is ineffective and taking medications that don't work. You need to create a database where people are informed with the information and the facts as to what works and what doesn't, and let them make those decisions.
Our guest tonight on Ideas and Work and Beyond has been David Straight.
Thanks, Marty.
Thank you so much. Keith Viola, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Your organization, Ridgefield Liberty Cooperative. Just Google that, right?
Yep.
Just
April
Google
2nd,
it.
Gary Johnson at the Ridgefield Playhouse.
April 2nd, Ridgefield Playhouse, Gary Johnson, former governor of New Mexico, and your guy for 2012 to be in the White House.
I hope so.
All right. And then Dave Straight, can they Google you and you'll get the Straight Talk email?
Hopefully I don't show up on Google. But just send straightdave@yahoo.com and I'll get it.
Okay, and we're going to have both of you back. I really appreciate you coming in. I want to close with what I opened with. The budget should be balanced. The Treasury should be refilled. Public debt should be reduced. The arrogance of officialdom should be tempered and controlled. And the assistance of foreign lands should be curtailed, lest we become bankrupt. People must again learn to work instead of living on public assistance. Cicero said that in BC 106, and it applies for today. Thanks again, and we'll see you next week. We're going to have Sam